They tried to fine me for growing tomatoes. The HOA, led by Karen with her ever-present clipboard and glare sharp enough to slice a cucumber, said my front yard vegetable garden was unsightly. What they didn't expect was that their petty fine would ignite a movement. One garden turned into 10, then 20, and soon I had the whole block digging in. If you've ever stood up to someone who tried to crush something good, you're going to love this story. Hit that subscribe button and let us know in the comments, where are you watching from? We love hearing from different corners of the world. I still remember the day I got the notice. It was a warm Tuesday morning, sun shining over the early rows of tomatoes and bell peppers that my kids had helped plant over spring break. And there it was, a bright yellow envelope taped to my door like a warning shot. Violation of HOA aesthetic guidelines, it read in bold block letters, with a fine of $75 and a threat of additional penalties if I didn't remove the non-compliant vegetation within 10 business days. I stood there, garden gloves still on, my fingers stained with soil and sweat, staring at the paper like it had personally insulted my grandmother. My name is Marcus Lane. I'm a father of 3, a software engineer by day, and a backyard gardening fanatic by soul. When we bought this house in the tidy, overmulched suburb of East Briar Glen, I knew it came with a homeowners association. I didn't love it, but I figured I'd keep my head down and focus on what mattered: raising good kids, being a good neighbor, and teaching my family the value of growing their own food. That garden wasn't just for fun, it was therapy. It was bonding. It was fresh produce in a world where everything comes in plastic. And I had put it in the front yard because it got the best sunlight, not because I wanted to make a statement. But now, apparently, I had made one anyway. Karen, the HOA president, was new to the role, but had already made herself infamous. She had the kind of energy that turned a bake sale into a military operation, and spent her evenings walking the neighborhood with a notebook, making observations. She didn't like my garden. She said it didn't conform to neighborhood harmony. I tried to talk to her. I explained that I had built neat, raised beds, that I didn't have weeds, that I kept it tidy and tasteful. I even offered to add some flower borders if it helped. But Karen didn't want compromise. She wanted compliance. She smiled with that cold HOA official smile and said, "Marcus, if we let you keep your carrots, what's next? Chickens in the driveway." I tried not to laugh, but I wasn't going to back down, so I appealed. I wrote to the board. I documented my garden with photos and explained its purpose. I got neighbors to sign a petition. Some even added, "We wish we had thought of doing that." But Karen rallied her board allies, most of whom had never even seen my yard up close, and they denied the appeal. The fines doubled, then tripled. And all while this happened, my kids started asking why we might have to tear out something they'd built with their hands. That's when I made a decision not just to fight, but to grow. Literally, I expanded the garden. I moved to the backyard. I reached out to 2 neighbors who said they had extra space, and suddenly, we were planting in 3 yards, then 5. Then I met Denise, who ran the East Briar Community Facebook group, and offered to help organize a planting day. Families showed up. Kids planted radishes and spinach. Someone brought lemonade. It turned into a block party. And all the while, Karen watched from across the street, arms folded, jaw tight. She issued more notices. She called code enforcement. But we weren't breaking any city laws. We'd checked. In fact, there were even tax incentives for home gardens, thanks to a new urban agriculture grant. One of the local council members stopped by and loved what we were doing. He took pictures. Karen fumed. The next HOA meeting was packed. For the first time in years, residents who had never shown up before were in those plastic folding chairs, demanding answers. Why were fines being issued for gardens that weren't hurting anyone? Why was the HOA fighting a movement that brought people together? Karen tried to keep control, but the tide had shifted. People were tired of being told they couldn't make their homes reflect their values. We voted, and for the first time, the board balance changed. Karen's power slipped, but the best was still to come. Because I had a plan, a bigger one. The plan started with a casual conversation and turned into a blueprint for transformation. I was talking with Mr. Alvarez, our elderly neighbor who'd lived in East Briar Glen longer than the sidewalks, and he mentioned how much he missed the old community garden back in his hometown in New Mexico. It gave me an idea. If a simple front yard garden could spark this much controversy and also this much support, What would happen if we turned the tables entirely? If we turned our resistance into a resource? I reached out to the city council member who had shown interest earlier and pitched the idea. Turn one of the HOA-owned unused common lots, a weed-ridden, fenced-in rectangle at the end of the cul-de-sac, into a community farm. Not just a garden, but an actual shared farm space. It wouldn't be owned by one family, and it wouldn't violate any HOA rule about individual landscaping. With enough signatures and pressure, the city could assist with the permitting and the non-profit application to manage it. And here's the kicker. If the HOA board declined to cooperate, the city had the power to pull certain land use easements granted years ago. Easements the HOA never properly maintained. We had leverage, so we mobilized. I created flyers, organized meetings, launched a website. Neighbors donated tools, seeds, compost. Local businesses sponsored garden beds with their names engraved in little wooden signs. My youngest son, who's only 7, named the project the People's Plot, and that name stuck like summer squash. We filed paperwork, raised funds, and even got a story published in the city newspaper. A retired architect in our neighborhood helped draw up the farm layout. Kids painted signs. Teenagers helped with the digging. Families brought picnic blankets and stories. It was more than gardening now. It was reclaiming what it meant to live next to each other, to care for something together. But Karen wasn't done yet. She called a special emergency HOA meeting and came armed with a printout of rules, highlighted in red, and a slideshow titled Vegetable Uprising, a Threat to Community Standards. She claimed our collective farm would attract pests, lower property values, and create a culture of unruly behavior. Unruly. These were parents and toddlers with watering cans, veterans tending kale, teens learning responsibility from tomatoes. She tried to introduce a new bylaw, banning all front and side yard vegetable planting, but it backfired. The more restrictive she got, the more people showed up to protest. People who had never even planted a basil leaf were suddenly wearing Grow Together t-shirts and showing up with wheat burrows. Karen's authority started to crack. We rallied votes. A surprise motion was introduced to recall the board president position. And on a warm Thursday night, with over 70 residents crammed into the community clubhouse, Karen lost. By majority vote, she was removed from office. Her scowl as she gathered her clipboard and stormed out will be burned in my memory forever. Her replacement, Denise, the same woman who ran the neighborhood Facebook group and helped launch our first community planting day. Under her leadership, the HOA approved our community farm initiative unanimously. The city followed through with the permit, and within 3 months, that neglected lot was bursting with life. Squash vines curling around handmade trellises, sunflowers towering like golden guards, and families working side by side. Mr. Alvarez said it felt like his childhood again, and for my family, it became our joy. My wife started teaching canning workshops. My middle daughter ran a stand where kids could trade vegetables like baseball cards. The HOA went from enemy to ally. They even started using our harvests in their own events, and while Karen still lived in the neighborhood, she didn't say a word. Not after she saw city councilman cut the ribbon at our grand opening. Not after the local paper ran a headline, From Fine to Farm, How a Garden Grew a Community. But what happened next is what no one expected, not even me, because this garden had roots far deeper than soil. The true harvest came not in the form of zucchini or cherry tomatoes, but in what this garden gave our community when it needed it most. Months after the farm officially opened, something happened that would test the very fabric of East Briar Glen. A late summer storm hit hard. It was one of those freak events you only expect to see on the news. 70 miles per hour winds, pelting hail, flash floods, trees came down, fences snapped like toothpicks, basements filled with water, and the power grid blew out for nearly 48 hours. The entire neighborhood was plunged into darkness. I'll never forget the silence that night. No TVs, no air conditioning, just the sound of wind and worry. But something remarkable happened the next morning. People didn't retreat. They emerged. At the community farm, under the tarp-covered shelter we had built for tool storage, families gathered. Someone brought a gas stove. Another brought a coffee press. We lit battery lanterns. Someone started frying eggs from their chickens. My kids handed out sliced cucumbers and peppers. We cooked together, huddled in the storm's aftermath, warmed, not just by food but by each other. It became our relief center, unofficial but undeniable. We charged phones using donated solar panels, brewed coffee, shared meals, offered comfort. A family whose roof had caved in stayed with us in our home. Teenagers helped older residents with cleanup. My wife coordinated supply runs, and Denise, our new HOA president, used the farm's corkboard to organize a rotating volunteer list. That small, once empty lot became a lifeline. It was where hope rooted itself in raised beds and compost. And standing there, handing out warm cornbread next to bundles of Swiss chard, I felt something powerful. Karen may have tried to fine us into silence, but she accidentally planted a revolution instead. A revolution of neighbors, not isolated by fences, but bonded through seeds, sun, and stubborn hope. Corinne never apologized, not that I expected her to, but she stayed quiet. Her blinds stayed closed, her lawn pristine yet lifeless. Meanwhile, our farm became a place of resilience and restoration. We added beehives, we started compost pickup. Local schools began bringing students for hands-on science lessons. A couple even got engaged between the tomato rows. Our farm started producing so much that we began donating to local food pantries. What started as a pushback against one clipboard-wielding control freak turned into a self-sustaining ecosystem of good. But perhaps the most emotional moment came one chilly morning in early spring. Mr. Alvarez, who had grown weaker over the winter, asked to be wheeled down to his raised bed. He'd planted garlic the fall before and wanted to see if it had sprouted. As he reached into the soil and pulled out the first green shoots, he looked at me with tears in his eyes. "We built something real here," he said. And he was right. This wasn't just about vegetables anymore. It was about legacy, about showing my kids and everyone else that when someone tries to tear down what you grow, you don't dig up the roots. You water them deeper. You find sunlight in the shadows. You create more life, more connection, more color. And if they try to fine you for that, you make it free for everyone instead. Karen thought she could control what we planted. She never expected we'd plant a movement. Now every time I walk by the garden gate and see a kid pulling up a carrot or an elder, teaching how to prune basil, I smile. Because what Karen meant to destroy, we turned into the most beautiful thing this neighborhood has ever seen.